horse stopped, its breath a white plume in the air, and Elias Graves did not urge it on. He sat in the saddle, hands resting on the pommel, his body aching from 3 weeks of riding north away from everything he knew. He looked down into the valley at the collection of shadows that called itself a town, Sulphur Creek. The sign back on the trailhead called it that. It looked more like a wound in the earth. This was the place. It was nowhere. He rode the last mile down a track that was more frozen mud than road. The ruts were deep enough to break an axle or a horse's leg. To his east, thin columns of smoke rose from the mine shafts, staining the gray sky a dirtier gray. The wind had a knife's edge coming straight down from the timberline where Elias knew wolves and worse waited for the weak. He had come to Montana in the fall of 1885, seeking a place where a name like Graves wouldn't turn heads, wouldn't draw whispers. He wanted a place where no one knew what had happened in Dodge City, what color badge he'd worn, or how much blood had soaked into the dust at his feet. Sulphur Creek was half abandoned. Half the buildings on the main street had their windows boarded up. The other half looked like they were barely hanging on. Elias bypassed the saloon, the clicking of billiard balls, and the sour smell of spilled beer leaking out into the cold. He went to the general store, which also served as the post office and land agent's desk. A man with a face like worn leather looked up from a ledger. "Looking for something? A place away from town?" Elias said. His voice was rough from D'Souza. "Got anything?" Quote. The man spat a brown stream of tobacco into his spittoon. "Got a claim up northwest. Worked out far as we know. Shack on it. Previous owner left in a hurry or in a box. Can't recall." "I'll take it," Elias said. "Don't you want to see it first?" "Just want the paper." Elias pulled a worn leather pouch from his saddlebag. "Had paid in cash. Green bags and a few gold coins." The man counted it twice, his eyes narrowing slightly at the weight of the payment, but he asked no questions. Money was money. He slid a deed across the counter. "It's yours, mister. Watch the roof and the wolves." Elias rode out. The shack was 2 miles from the town's last light, set on a rise of barren land. The land agent hadn't lied. It was broken. The porch sagged. The wind whistled through 3 broken panes of glass and a dozen gaps in the chinking, between the logs, but it was private and it was paid for. He spent the first week in silence. His world shrank to the perimeter of the property. He worked from first light until his hands were too numb and his shoulders screamed. He hauled lumber from the nearby pines using his hatchet and a rusty saw he'd found in the lean-to. He was methodical. He cut and planed the wood, repairing the porch steps. He used mud and straw to rechink the logs, sealing the gaps against the growing cold. He replaced the broken glass with oiled canvas, shutting out the view but keeping the wind at bay. The land was hard. Every night a heavy frost settled in, making the ground like iron by morning. He dug a new latrine. It took him half a day, the pickaxe ringing against the frozen earth. He slept, but he did not rest. He slept on a straw tick on the floor, his coat for a blanket and his saddle for a pillow. Under the saddle, cold and heavy, rested his Colt revolver. He woke often in the night, his hand gripping the walnut stock, the smell of gunpowder, and fear still clinging to his memory. He would lie awake for hours listening to the wind, to the high, lonely howl of a wolf pack in the timber. He avoided the townsfolk. He'd brought enough salt pork, hardtack, and coffee to last a month. He hunted for his suppers, a few rabbits, a stringy grouse. He was a good shot, quiet and efficient. He took no pleasure in it. On the 10th day he saw her. He was on his roof, nailing down the last of the new-cut shingles, the metallic tang of the cold nails sharp in his mouth. He glanced east toward the only other homestead in sight. It was a 4 mile off, separated by a barbed wire fence and a patch of dead thistle. A woman was out back of the other house hanging laundry. He stopped hammering. The wind was brutal, whipping her skirts around her ankles and tearing at the heavy wet sheets in her hands. She wore a drab wool dress and no hat. Her hair, dark brown, was pulled back tight. Butt strands had escaped and lashed across her face. He watched her fight the wind and the canvas. Her shoulders were set, her movements angry and strong. She was alone. There was no one to help her hold the line taut. No one to hand her the clothespins. She must have felt his eyes. She stopped, one hand holding a white sheet that snapped like a flag, and turned her head. She looked right at Ashak. He was a dark shape against the gray sky, a hammer in his hand. Elias expected a wave, a nod. The custom of the frontier. A small acknowledgement of shared hardship. The widow did not wave. She stared at him for a long, hard second. Her face was pale and plain, shut tight against the cold and against him. Then she turned back to her work, snatching another pin from the bag at her waist and driving it onto the line with fierce, deliberate force. Elias turned back to his hammering. The message was clear. He was to keep his distance. That suited him fine. He ran out of nails 3 days later, and that's when Sulphur Creek, the woman next door, and the ghosts of his past all began to collide in ways he never expected. Leisha had spent the better part of that morning sorting through an old crate left by the shack's previous owner, when he heard the wagon. The crunch of wheels over frost was slow, hesitant. He stepped outside, pulling his coat tight. The sound came from the direction of the widow's place. She was driving, small frame hunched against the wind, reins in hand. The wagon's right wheel wobbled badly. It listed to one side, dragging as it rolled until the back spoke snapped clean through. The wagon jolted, spilling a sack of potatoes onto the frozen dirt. Elias didn't think. He just moved. By the time he reached her, she was already on her knees, gathering what she could with trembling hands. He noticed she wasn't wearing gloves. Her fingers were red, raw from cold. "Let me help," he said. She looked up sharply, her breath misting between them. "I can manage." He crouched anyway, picking up the last of the potatoes. "Looks like the wheel's done for." Her eyes flicked toward the broken spoke. "So it is." There was something proud in her tone, too proud for the shape her life had taken. Her dress was patched at bothel bows. Her boots had been mended more than once. The wagon bore the marks of long use, and the mule hitched to it looked older than either of them. "You're Mrs. Harker," he said. "I bought the shack west of you." "I know who you are," she answered quietly. "Folks talk." He felt that old knot tighten in his gut. "What do they say?" "That you don't talk much? That you came from Dodge? That you paid in cash?" He didn't reply. He simply stood, motioned to the wagon, and said, "Let's get it upright." Together they lifted. The effort took both of them straining, the cold air burning in their lungs. When the wagon settled again, the broken wheel leaned badly, but stood enough to move at a crawl. "You'll make it home slow," he said. "But you'll make it." She brushed dirt from her skirt. "I can't afford a new wheel." He nodded toward his shack. "Got tools. Maybe I can fix it," her brows lifted. "Why would you?" He paused. The truth that he needed to keep busy or the past would eat him alive wasn't something to say out loud. "Because it's what neighbors do," he said simply. She studied him for a long time. "All right. Bring your tools after supper, but I won't feed you." He almost smiled. Didn't ask. That night, the smell of wood smoke drifted across the frozen fields. Elias walked the distance, carrying his toolbox and lantern. Mrs. Harker's home was small but sturdy. A single light glowed through the window. Inside, her walls were lined with books and hand-sewn curtains. It looked like a place that still believed in living, not just surviving. She opened the door before he knocked. "You're late." "Had to find my wrench," he said. "Come on, then." They worked in silence. She held the lantern, and he replaced the spoke using scrap lumber from her barn. His hands were steady, the movements automatic. Years of fixing things in the field had made him precise. When he finished, she said quietly, "My husband built this wagon. Before the fever took him, he set the wrench down. I'm sorry." "Don't be. That was 3 winters ago." Her eyes flicked toward the lantern flame, softening. "You don't talk much either, Mr. Graves. Nothing worth saying." "I doubt that." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of the lantern hook swaying in the wind. He looked at her. Really looked. The hardness in her face wasn't cruelty. It was armor, and underneath it, something tired and kind. He wanted to ask her name, her first name, but didn't. Instead, he said, "You should keep a spare wheel hub. Winter's not done yet." Her mouth curved faintly. "You sound like a man who plans to stay." "Maybe," he said, "if the roof holds." The next morning, a small bundle sat on his porch. Bread wrapped in linen, still warm, no note, no name. Just the faint smell of honey. He carried it inside, set it on the table, and stared at it for a long time. The shack, once silent as a grave, suddenly felt different. There wasn't quite as heavy. Days passed. He began finding reasons to ride by her place, bringing firewood, mending agate. She never asked him in, but she always came out to meet him, that guarded look softening a little each time. Once he caught her humming while she swept the porch, it stopped him in his tracks. The sound was light, fragile, almost forgotten. Then came the snowstorm. It roared down from the mountains without warning, thick flakes turning the world white in minutes. Elias was out splitting wood when he saw the smoke from her chimney vanish. Heck knew what that meant. The flue was blocked. The kind of mistake that could fill a cabin with smoke in minutes. He didn't hesitate. He pulled his coat on, grabbed his lantern, and fought through the storm. The wind tore at him, but he pushed forward until he reached her door. He banged his fist against the frame. Mrs. Harker, no answer. He shoved the door open. The air inside was thick with smoke, choking gray. She was slumped by the stove. Coughing weakly, he lifted her, carried her out into the cold air. She gasped, tears streaking suit down her face. Her voice broke. You shouldn't have come. Wasn't about choice, he said. It's about neighbors. She stared up at him, trembling. Noon's come for me since he died. He looked at her through the snow and said quietly, maybe it's time someone did. As the storm howled around them, something in her eyes changed. The distance between them, made of years of loss and silence, narrowed just a little. He stayed until the fire burned clean again, the air safe to breathe. When he left, her voice stopped him at the door. Elias. He turned. That's my name, she said softly. My first one. Hen nodded once. I know now. By the time spring came to Sulphur Creek, the snow had melted into thick brown rivers running through every hollow in the land. The air smelled of pine and mud. Elias had mended fences, repaired his roof twice, and learned the shape of silence that no longer frightened him. But what unsettled him now wasn't the quiet. It was the way the quiet began to feel like peace. He saw Eliza Harker most mornings. Sometimes she came by with a basket of bread or a small jar of preserves. Other days he found excuses to walk the fence line between their lands. He'd fix a wire that didn't need fixing or chop a fallen branch near her path. They rarely spoke for long. Their conversations were simple, unhurried, but every word carried weight. One afternoon she found him by the creek washing his hands after working the soil. You planting something? She asked. Maybe potatoes, he said. I'm not much of a farmer. Potatoes don't ask for much, she replied. Just light water and time. He smiled faintly. That's more mercy than most people ever get. Her eyes softened. You speak like a man who's lost too much. I buried a lot back in Dodge, he admitted. Men, regrets, and one woman who deserved better than the man I was. Eliza looked at him quietly, the breeze catching strands of her hair. You don't have to keep digging graves for what's already gone. He met her gaze. You sound like someone who knows I do, she said simply. When my husband died, I thought the world ended. I built these walls to keep everything out. Then one day I realized I'd trapped myself inside them. Her voice broke slightly. Some days I still can't open the curtains. It feels like letting the world see me as a betrayal to his memory. Elias hesitated, then said softly, maybe he'd want you to see the world again. They stood in silence, the creek running between them, carrying the sound of moving life through the valley. That night Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the glow flickering across his face. The revolver he'd carried for years lay on the table. He turned it over in his hand, the steel cold familiar, the tool that had taken more than it ever gave. At dawn, he walked outside, dug a hole by the fence, and buried it deep beneath the earth. No ceremony, no words, just a man letting go. The next day, he saddled his horse and rode to town. For the first time since arriving, he didn't keep his head down. He sold some hides, bought seed, and spoke to people. Small things, but each one felt like a gate creaking open. When he returned, Eliza was waiting by the fence with a basket. Inside were 2 small pies and a note folded beneath them. He looked at her questioningly. I thought you could use something sweet, she said, her tone shy but steady. He took the basket, eyes meeting hers. I don't deserve this kind of kindness, maybe not, she said with a faint smile. But you've earned it anyway. Weeks passed and Sulphur Creek began to thaw into color. The hills turned green again, wildflowers pushing through the stubborn soil. Life was creeping back, not just into the land, but into Elias himself. He fixed Eliza's fence one afternoon, and she brought lemonade to the porch. They sat together, the sunlight soft and forgiving. She asked quietly, do you still think you came here to bury your past? Elias looked across the land. His land, her home, the endless horizon that no longer felt empty. I thought so, but maybe I came here to find a reason to keep going. She set her glass down, her voice almost a whisper. And did you? He turned to her, a rare warmth in his eyes. I think I just did. The breeze stirred the curtains inside her cabin. Somewhere a metalwork sang. The sound carried between them like a promise neither had to say out loud. From that day on, the neighbors who passed by Sulphur Creek noticed something different. 2 chimneys smoking instead of one. 2 voices sometimes carried across the wind. Laughter faint but unmistakable. Elias Graves never left Montana again. He built a new barn that spring, stronger than the one before. And each Sunday he rode beside Eliza into town. Some said he looked 10 years younger. Others said it was the widow who brought him back from the grave. But those who really watched knew the truth. Sometimes a man doesn't need a miracle. He just needs someone to look his way and remind him that living still matters. And for Elias Graves, that reminder had come in the form of a widow hanging laundry in the